Welcome back to Alchemize with Alanna, where we explore what it really takes to lead, purpose, and have composure in the work world, or how you show up when things get especially hard. And when you're a leader, there's a lot of pressure testing that you go through. Strategy alone isn't always enough. And leaders who navigate difficulty well tend to have three things in common: healthy curiosity, emotional resilience, and clarity around what truly matters. And joining me today is Hunter McMahon, who has a history as a testifying expert and is now the president of iDiscovery Solutions. And he's now known for also guiding teams and clients through high-stakes legal, data, and business decisions. So Hunter, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So I like to give the audience a question before we dive in. So the first one I want to ask the audience to think about is, what is one challenge that you're currently facing as a leader, and what quality do you think is being tested the most right now? Is it your curiosity? Is it your ability to be resilient, or your ability to prioritize? Because I see that a lot too. And also, as I'm having this conversation with Hunter, we always encourage live comments so that we can speak to those as well. And it makes our conversation even more interesting. So the first topic is, of course, the power of curiosity. So that, I don't know about you, but I often see it talked as a soft skill, which kind of cracks me up. But it's really, you know what I mean? Because it's really one of the hardest things to access when things get tough. So when under pressure, such in the type of high stakes situations that your clients find themselves in, or say leading a team through uncertainty, which a lot are going through right now, constant change, how does that play out, in when decisions get made? So for you, Hunter, I'd love to ask, so how does someone keep curiosity alive when everyone around them is uncertain?
So taking you a little ways back, I became fascinated with curiosity, not because I think I was doing it well. It was actually, I realized that I had a gap in my analysis.
Okay.
As you mentioned, I was a testifying expert, testified for years in court proceedings, and data was my house, right? Like that was what I did very well. I understood it. I knew how it worked. I knew mechanically what it was going to tell me. I knew how to be able to get it to display what I wanted it to display. And for me, oftentimes, looking hindsight, I could analyze it and get an answer. Well, in day-to-day business, it's not exactly that easy, because the data I was gathering from different aspects of our business was telling me one thing, but the people were telling me something different. I'm too busy. I can't meet these demands. There's too much on my plate. But I was looking at utilization over here and the reports that I had built, which was raw data coming from the timekeeping system that we were leveraging. And what I realized was I was not asking the question. So it actually, if you go all the way back, I was sitting here in my basement watching the episode of Ted Lasso where he's in the bar with the dart scene, right?
Okay, yeah.
And he quotes Walt Whitman, "Be curious, not judgmental." And that really was, I sat there and I was like, that's it. My wife's like, "What's it?" And I'm like, that's the missing part. I wasn't asking the right questions. And so as we kind of started to unpack that, what I realized was, even in the most tense situations, asking the question, and the simplest question, why? Why are we in this position? Why are we trying to change something? Why are we trying to solve this? Why are we trying to save this? Whatever it is, that why. And my kids, I have 4 of them, they ask it constantly, whether it's the teenager asking it because we're not letting her do something, or the little kid that's asking it, like, why is the sky blue? It doesn't matter, right? They're constantly asking these questions because that childlike curiosity it's raw, it's natural. They're trying to understand the world around them, and they have no predisposition as to why it should be that way. And one of the things I realized as I was doing a lot of reading, tons of reading and research and all that, was the childlike curiosity is something special, because they are not burdened with making the fast decisions trying to make 32 decisions a day when you should be making 12 or whatever it is, right? So as we grow up in our professional careers, we're often kind of bound by this time constraint that kind of starts to dampen our own curiosity. Do I have the time to deal with the questions right now? Do I have the time to ask what I'm really thinking? Or is this good enough? Let's go solve the next problem, right? And so
I love,
oftentimes it's a matter of stepping back and being like, hold on, nobody's asking the right questions. Like we're solving the wrong problem. And our chief
yeah.
of staff is amazing at being like, are you guys talking about the real problem here? Or are we talking about the symptoms? And unless you start asking the whys, right? And Toyota was famous for the 5 whys. I,
Yes. Yes.
I have to balance. So in the consulting world, I focus on 3 whys. Maybe it's because I played baseball growing up and my son plays it now. So everything's 3 strikes. But you're sitting there. And so you're asking why. And eventually you get to a point where everybody's comfortable. But if nobody's asking the questions, that's when you're in your own head at that point, and you really run the risk of making a bad decision, not for lack of caring, but just lack of perspective.
Well, I love that Ted Lasso and your children brought curiosity back into your realm. And what I love about what you said, so many things. One is I notice that sometimes people do have a tendency to fully rely on just data. And what I'm in interviewing business owners or founders, hands down, what a lot of them say is that in order to scale a business, you also have to tap into your own intuition. And to do that, you need curiosity to be able to ask
Correct.
yourself and self-reflect on those questions, right? And the other thing that I love about what you just said is that we, at some point in our lives, I don't know when it happens. I don't know if it's like a particular experience or a particular age, but at one point we, I don't want to say we grow out of that childlike curiosity because I feel like we still have it, but I think we're taught or programmed to not utilize it anymore. And we tend to then overcomplicate things and ask questions that it's not the right question. It veers us off in a different direction. It doesn't get to the real issue.
Well, I think that, let's just talk about our regular life, right? We go from a kid who is spending days in school and recess and having fun on the playground afterwards. And, I was running around the neighborhood and trying to cause all kinds of ruckus after school. And then we'd come home for dinner when the street lights turned on until you figured out that the laser
Yeah.
pointer would turn the street lights back off from down the block and you could get an extra 30 minutes. But that was how do I turn off the light? Let's figure that out. And so once
Lots
you
of
did, you're like,
curiosity to figure that out, right?
you got it. You got
Yeah.
it. And so as we look at that, it's I think when life gets busy, and I'm guilty. I run 1,000,000 miles an hour, constantly on the move, flying out at tomorrow morning, get up at, 3 a.m. to go catch a flight. It's one thing after another. So I'm not slow paced, but that's what's the tension. Do I have time to dig in and understand the why? Or, at some level, do I care all the time? Or is this a decision that we need to move on from and just keep going? Is it a decision we do need to, hey, there's something more here? And being willing to take that time and that intentionality, because we don't have the spare time anymore. We have to
Right.
actually think, we have to think through it and focus on we have to prioritize.
Well, that makes me think about the difference between being curious and second guessing yourself. So, what is the distinction between the two for you?
Stubbornness, I guess. I don't have a good
Are you
answer for that
open?
one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think being curious is, oftentimes I focus on being curious with others, not against myself.
Mhm.
I'm asking the questions to get to the root of the problem, but I'm usually collaborating with a teammate. It's somebody that brought an issue, and it's like, okay, well, why are we in this situation? Why are we trying to satisfy the client? Because sometimes the client expectations may be wrong, and we need to actually help correct those before we actually try to solve the problem. Or, you know what? Look, we made a mistake. Own up for it, right? There's nothing really curious you need to be there, but you need to have the courage to stand in front of it at that point. And so I think, don't use it against yourself. Use it more for the collaboration, because that's where you're gaining the perspectives from others.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, absolutely. And well, normally too, we don't realize it. We have our own biases and then we talk ourselves out of things, or we have self-doubt. So there's different layers to it. So being able to collaborate with others on problem solving is hugely beneficial. And I just want to say this too. I find it very interesting that a lot of people will, especially in interviews, will say when they're asked like, what's a strength of yours? And they'll say, oh, I'm a really good problem solver. Well, what I've realized is that we all are. It's an aspect of who we are. We're just natural problem solvers, but we at some point stopped being curious and stopped having that ability, or incapacitated our own ability to be able to problem solve. And so therefore we see it as this thing that it's not natural, yet it is.
It is, but it's suppressed, right? Because you don't
Yeah.
have the time, you don't have the opportunity. But I'm going to take a slight twist from your second guessing yourself to when do you need to know how to stop and move on, right? Because
Right.
that at some level it's priority, and it's not, hey, I've had this conversation in 6 different ways. I understand the moving parts. I understand that there may be some other areas that I don't know about, but the risk isn't worth it. We got to move on. Like there is some cutoff. So it's not, I think, you say we want to foster a curious environment. We want our team to be curious, but you can't be curious endlessly all the time. You still got to get business done. And so there is a balance, and that's where leadership comes in though. Like you can have that curiosity, but also know how to prioritize. And that to me would be the bigger struggle, not second guessing it.
100%. And they need to be confident to be able to make that call and trust that, even if others don't understand it, that they know from their own instinct and intuition, sometimes with the mix of having some data, that they're making the best decision
Yeah.
at that moment to go ahead and move forward with that. So something that I'm also curious about is, when have you seen curiosity shift in the outcome of a situation where, say, a conflict was transformed into collaboration?
Ooh. No, I'll focus on some examples of kind of where we thought the solution was one thing and we were going well down a path, right? An
Okay.
internal operational performance change that we were going to reorganize like a whole process and kind of a core process. So it wasn't ancillary. It was, something that we needed to focus on. And we were missing a perspective in the room. And somebody else joining us in the room then said, well, have you started thinking about this? Now, depending on how long you've worked on a problem like that, you're going, we're at the 5 yard line. Let us just finish. Like, thanks for joining us. But, but the way that they were able to craft the questions was not breaking down what would had been built and what we had worked on, but rather kind of the curiosity of the underlying framework. And what we discovered was we had underappreciated another area of the business that was, I wouldn't say would have suffered, but would have not benefited from the changes. And by making a few tweaks, we were able to make it more holistic, right? And so having the right voices and the different perspective in that issue, and being open to somebody who may not have been core involved but had a great input. It's hard to know who all should be in every room, but being open to it and more perspectives often yields better results.
I love it. It's having the right people there for sure. Yeah. So this is where I want to move on to resiliency. But before I do, here's another question for the audience. Think about a recent challenge that you have faced. Did you lean in with curiosity or reflecting on it? And do you think that you tried to control the outcome? And if you did lean in with curiosity, what changed when you got curious instead of reactive? So that, ties in with our ability to be resilient, because sometimes we want to control and sometimes we're being reactive versus resilient. So that's a word that I started to hear a couple years ago at the beginning of COVID, I would really say. And now we hear about it constantly, but I think it's often misunderstood. And I've observed leaders figuring out what real resilience looks like and feels like for them in real time, especially when things don't go according to plan. So
When do
what,
they go according to plan?
well, fair enough, right? Yeah, it's really true. So what do you think are some misconceptions leaders have about resilience?
Ooh, I think, resilience is not perfect, right? I don't think that it is a finish line. I don't think it is a destination, if you will. To me, it's more about being able to stay on the journey and being able to course correct. I think oftentimes when we react to a situation, it's to solve a problem, but sometimes that's not the best reaction. Our founder, I believe it's our founder's daughter, said it once: "Is your problem is not your problem. Your reaction to your problem is your problem."
Oh, yes.
And
I love that. Yeah.
great quote. And it's one of those that oftentimes, because of what we as a company do, right? We consult and testify on high stakes litigation. Tensions are high, stress levels are through the roof, and every detail matters, but you don't always get it perfect. We have people in play, right? And so whether it's a miscommunication, a mistake that happens that we have to correct, how we stay resilient is not by overreacting, but by doing what's right and standing in front of it rather than behind it. And so, as we like to say, oftentimes we stand in front of our testimony, not behind it. And
Mhm.
we're actually willing to put ourselves out there because we believe in our process and our people in our process, so much so that, look, we'll take a lump here and there, but we'll stand by it, right? And I think that kind of resilience of being able to stay the course despite bumps in the road is what you should be looking for, not, hey, we finally found the golden road and we're here and now it's smooth. There's always a bump. There's always the next bump. So how you respond to those bumps.
Right. And the thing that I love to work with teams on is being able to reflect on that so that they can replicate it and do it again, especially in a future scenario, because sometimes they'll get through it in that way. But if they don't take the time to reflect on it and really get specific about what supported them and being able to do that, the next time they're in a situation, sure, instinctively they might do it again, but they might not. So by calling it out, it makes it easier to draw from and recall.
Yeah, you have to learn what you're doing well and what you're not doing well, but kind of
Mhm.
sitting there. So, we often will have quarterly meetings and annual planning meetings like most businesses. And at the end, one of the key things that we do is we debrief what went well and what could have gone better, right?
I love that.
And so you're sitting there going, look, all of this was aces, but here's how we could tweak it next time and make it a little bit better. But this worked really well. We need to make sure at annual we do this exercise because it gave us this kind of clarity. Maybe it takes 2 hours the first time and 20 minutes the second time because you're in a rhythm, but there are certain elements that we make sure we want to repeat and not miss because somebody that the agenda got tight.
Right. So when there are setbacks, how do you rebuild trust and momentum, especially when the team is exhausted or they've lost morale? Because that's happening a lot nowadays too.
Yeah. So nobody's perfect, and I'm far from it. So how I do it is probably less than perfect by all stretches, but I'll say intentional, right? And so, you know, for me, communication is king, and I'm a high tempo, high frequency communicator. Try to be responsive, but I don't try to rush to a reply, if that makes sense. So the distinction of, I'm going to say, hey, I got it. I need 2 days to be able to get through this, or I'm in this motion right now. Can I call you in 3 hours? Because I want to acknowledge the communication, but I don't want to be too quick to reply because what I found is when I'm too quick to reply, it's not intentional misleading, but sometimes you're just shooting from the hip a little too much, and the details that somebody else caught that then becomes something different. You're like, now I got to clarify that. And it really wasn't intentionally misleading. It was just the way, I was distracted. I was doing five things at once. And so to me, that intentional communication, I think it's one of those we could always do more and less of at the same time because you do too much and it becomes noise. You do too little and people are left in the dark. So you're constantly trying to fine tune what works for you, what works for the company, what works for the team. And not everybody consumes information the same way. So making sure it's multiple channels, right? Do we do a stand up on a monthly basis and an all hands on a quarterly basis where it's more verbal and presentation style? versus, some more tactical, shorter emails if something's critical is coming online, or filtering it through team members so that there's an understanding at each level as opposed to just information getting out there. To me, that kind of transparency and communication is how you start to rebuild trust. But
Mhm.
trust comes through results and actions, right? It doesn't come through me saying, "Don't worry, trust us." It becomes me telling you we're going to do something, we follow through with it. And so to me, that constant, building of trust happens when you're intentional about the communication so people know about the wins and what you commit to. Hidden commitments, you get to execute, but that nobody knows about those. And so it's really hard to build trust if you hide all those commitments and the accountability side of things.
Yeah, the trust conversation is one of my favorite conversations to have with teams, and one of the questions that we'll sometimes ask is, do you believe that trust needs to be earned or can it be given? Right. And then the thinking around, is trust like these big momentous moments, or can it happen in little moments? And Brene Brown is really well known for her research on that, in that it's the small moments that add up that support that. So when you get to those big moments, it makes it even easier, and it's much harder to rebuild trust when things get off track, versus if it's always there. And that definitely deepens relationships. So,
And I do think two quick comments, if you don't mind, is one
please,
is
yeah.
I think different people have different levels of default trust. Some
Mm,
people come into a conversation or a relationship and say, "I will by default give you the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise," while some others come in the opposite direction, and
mhm.
they're on guard, and it's like, "Hold on, you got to prove yourself, you got to prove to me." So I find different variations of that, and I don't think that there's a right or wrong as long as you know who you are, um, because I think those micro trust points is spot on,
Yeah.
and it comes out of action and commitment and action and communication with that.
Well, and that requires a certain depth of self-awareness. And to your point, again, in having this dialogue with teams, also depending on what the purpose is for the team to be working together, right? Is it a team that's always together in the directory, or is it a project team? Because if it's a project team, which tends to be more temporary, sometimes I'll ask, hey, do you believe that trust can be given or does it need to be earned? Because if all of you think that it needs to be earned, and you're not together for very long, like let's say you're together for a year, and a new person comes into the team, and when there's one person change, we call it in team coaching, it's that we look at the teams as a system. When
Okay.
one person comes in or one person goes out, the system changes, right? So because one person can change the dynamic. And let's say a new person comes in, if everybody on the team expects that person to prove themselves, it's like, hey, wait a second. They submitted a resume, they went through a series of interviews, they went through the hiring process, they went through the onboarding process, and now you're going to make them, prove themselves even further. So, right. So I'm not wronging or judging those that, kind of lean more towards the trust needs to be earned. It's just, if you look at the context with of what you're in, and how things could accelerate so that the effectiveness of you and your team increases, that's something that's important to look at too.
So I really like that, but is it you're changing the factor of trust, or are you changing their risk matrix? So are they willing to
Well,
risk
I
def
can't change. Yeah, I can't change their. If I'm interpreting you correctly, I can't change their factor of trust. But what did you call it? The risk.
the risk matrix, right? Like if
Yeah.
they're willing to default, I'm not really changing whether I trust you or not. I'm willing to negotiate against myself to get the business process done, even though I know I don't fully trust you. Like they're making a risk mitigation decision and saying, look, the greater good is here. And I'm
Yep.
willing to go there, but I don't think you fundamentally change the trust until it's earned. Or
Yeah.
until they accept it. We'll leave it with acceptance.
Yeah. I don't think it's a black or white. I don't think it's a
Right.
this or that. Like you said as we were in the pre-show, it's the gray in between. So it's recognizing where their own comfort zone is, and being open to challenge themselves a little bit depending on what the overall objective is for themselves and the team, right? If they look outside of themselves, maybe other centered more for a moment, for the sake of the team and the objective of the work, what you're trying to accomplish and who it's going to impact, that might have, create it such that somebody is more open.
Correct. I agree with that.
Awesome. Okay, so another question for the audience. When was the last time you surprised yourself with your own resilience? What helped you recover faster than you thought you could? And this is where I want to share, because we're going to talk about priorities next. And in terms of priorities as a leader or business owner, it changes all the time. And I've worked with senior leaders, and one a few weeks ago who came to a session totally exhausted by one of his salespeople. And this man was smart, he was kind, but he was draining everybody around him. And he questioned everything, he interrupted constantly, and had alienated most of the team. My client was frustrated, out of patience, and unsure how to lead him without blowing up the relationship. So in one session, we unpacked what was actually happening, which wasn't defiance. It was mental overload and disorganized curiosity. So together, me and the client built a framework on how to address it, for them to be able to observe behaviors, not focus on personality traits per se. And that shifted the dynamic from tension to understanding. So by the end of the hour, he wasn't dreading the next conversation with his salesperson. He was actually looking forward to it. So I'm bringing this up because I now offer a single session, which is called the Resolve session. And it's a conversation that will help you see the real issue, find your footing, and allow you to lead with confidence again. So contact me if that sounds something that could be supportive to you. So the last topic is priorities. And so in challenging times, like we are very much in these days, I see owners and corporate leaders approach things in a way where everything always feels urgent all the time. And in the realm of prioritization, something that they struggle with is distinguishing between what's truly important and what might appear to be complaints or the experience of uncertainty when pressure is high. So Hunter, how do you help your team or your clients get connected on priorities without burning out?
Well, I found the 27th hour in the day that helps me put an extra. No, I'm just joking. There's not enough hours in the day for all of our. Yeah. You were going with that.
I was
So priority is a daily thing. Sometimes it's an hourly thing. It's certainly on a monthly and quarterly basis, an annual. And so we operate off of EOS, the business operating system. And so that gives us some kind of lens and framework, right? The VTO says, here's your vision. Your traction and organizer says, here is your 1 year, right? So here are our targets. Here are our milestones throughout the year. We call them rocks. That gives us some frame of reference from a business standpoint, right? It's saying, okay, we have this great idea, but how's that going to impact what we wrote down? So that it's kind of a northern star for us when we want to go through a new initiative. We want to reconcile all of our discussions, our ideas, and our initiatives off of this. Now, sometimes that changes, right? We update that on an annual basis, occasionally on a quarterly if there's some big market shift or something like that. But that really becomes kind of a stick in the mud, if you will, so that we know that we're rowing in the same direction. We know that we don't get distracted, and that's kind of macro picture. When it comes to daily, I mean, it's a constant struggle. I mean, I struggle. I sit there and I wake up, I look at my calendar, I'm like, great, and I have 92 emails, and I've got 42 chats, and I've got this, and I've got that, and I've got a little 5-year-old that's trying to ask me to make, if she can push the coffee button, and I'm just trying to get through notifications. Haven't had coffee yet. And so I think it's finding your own system. Everybody's got their own system. From I need to clear my communications because that gives me angst before I make a big decision. So that I kind of need to clear the inbox and get clarity so that then I can focus. Others I've heard, they focus first so that they're not distracted by the communication. But remember earlier, high tempo communication is one of my things. And so I've got to make sure that is satisfied so that then I can focus. And I think part of it is saying no part of the time or a lot of the time. I don't need to be in every meeting. I've got to trust the team. So we've got to get to that point where I can say, no, I don't need to be there. I need to focus on this. But oftentimes I kind of put it into an investment mindset of where's the greatest use of time, right?
Yes.
Where am I,
Yeah.
where's the company going to get the greatest use of my time, my ROI, my attention, and really trying to focus there. I think, at best, I'm 50% on a regular basis, but hopefully I don't let it lapse too long that it becomes a problem, right? Because then somebody comes back and says, hey, hold on, what happened to this? And it's like, I knew I dropped something. I just didn't know where. And for me, if we go back to the couple conversations ago, insofar as trust, owning the mistakes as part of that prioritization miss is like, should have given clarity on that. My bad. How do I adjust? And owning part of that is where that trust comes in because you're not going to get it right all the time. Something that should have been a priority yesterday that you now know should have been a priority yesterday, and you got to play catch up. So to me, that kind of transparency into the why, even it is a priority, but then also being able to shuffle and understand that, you don't need to stay too firm on that. We live in a very fast paced, very high tempo changing world that, you need to have that agility. You can't be so rigid, you can't adjust.
Yeah. And it feels like it's getting faster by the day. And something that you just said about a minute or two ago, I will often say to leaders, sometimes they'll confide in me and tell me about something where they said something or they did something and they didn't show up as their best self and they're kind of regretting what they did do. And I always tell them it's never too late to go and clean it up. So and then if you were to take the opportunity to do that, what would the impact of that be for both you, the other person, the relationship, the topic at hand? And in just talking through that, the tension or the beating themselves up about it or the nervousness of like, if I go attempt to clean this up, what's the outcome going to be? It starts to dissipate. And then by the end, they're like, yep, I can go do this. And it's pretty powerful being able to do that. But yeah, I always say it's never too late. Even,
Never too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've actually done, I've done it a couple of times over the last couple of years is, listen, I'm not ready for this meeting today. I'm in a sour mood,
Mm-hmm.
don't feel well, got this barking down my neck. What do we have to accomplish today versus what can we move? And I think allowing everybody from a team be able to come with that, it can't be an all the time thing, right? But
Yeah.
from a look, something's up. I'm fully distracted right now. I'm not in the spot to make big decisions, but I get that some of these tactical things we got to cover, we got to do this, right? Those types of things still have the train still has to keep going is giving the space to be able to do that. And, on occasion doing it yourself when you are not there that day.
Yeah. Well, and having that, being that comfortable in your own skin, and I call it honoring yourself. When you honor yourself in that way and you model that to other people, it's really interesting how that can, in essence, give them permission to do something similar. And then now all of a sudden you're creating, kind of back to trust. You're creating this environment of total honesty in a respectful way because you're
Right.
doing it in such a way where you're honoring yourself, right? And then it gives people the message of like, oh, I can do that too. And that actually that increases not only trust, but the ability to collaborate and support one another even more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I also see as necessary sometimes is, and leaders have a hard time doing, is changing direction midstream. We kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but have you ever had to change priorities midstream, and how did you communicate that shift?
We've done our fair share of shifting over the years.
I
We're
bet.
privately held, so I think oftentimes we probably have the opposite problem. As a consulting firm, you're rarely comfortable, you're rarely stuck in your ways, and you're quick to shift, which has its benefits and its fun adventures. I think one of the times that, we had probably put out some strategic messaging one way, and we realized that we didn't quite have it right. Or better yet, what we realized in a couple of ways is what we had thought we had said was not what we had said. And so that clarity really added a whole level of like complication to it. And so it was getting back, and I believe it was at an all hands, is we explained what was the disconnect and why that the words may be changing and the icon may be changing on the screen, but the reality was the core idea behind it is still true north, right? We went back to our goals, we went back to our strategies, and helping others understand why you're changing directions, is as important as the change in direction. Now, they may not agree with everything. I've learned to have to accept that, in more ways than I can count. But I think being able to sit there and go to sleep at night and say, look, I'm willing to explain it. If I didn't explain it well enough, I'm happy to have that conversation again, because I believe in the why, not try to hide that, not try to hide behind, just, hey, we're just changing, just deal with it kind of thing, right? I believe kind of that curiosity comes back and is like, well, why? Well, why? Right? And people want to know some element of why. Sometimes you got to say more elements here than I can explain right now, and hopefully you've built that trust to that point where that's accepted, so that when you can't explain it, you will.
Yeah. Well, and there's the level of transparency based on the need to know, right? Especially I mean, let's be real, that in a hierarchical organization where there's, right, it's different. I had a manager at my last role, and she would say to us, she would give us the heads up on changes or decisions that are going on, and she would say, here's what I can tell you. There are things that I can't tell you. And every once in a while she would say, here are things that I'm not supposed to tell you, but I trust you guys. And she wouldn't give us everything that would compromise anything, but just to provide enough understanding, especially because of the work that we did with leaders and teams. Sometimes, it was helpful to understand, because it would show up in our workshops when we'd be facilitating. And if we didn't have at least some ounce of knowledge about it, we didn't know, right? It's like, how do we facilitate these dialogues for these teams? But yeah. So last question around priorities. What's one question that you ask yourself when deciding what to focus on next?
Ooh, that's a good one.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. I think when we look at priorities, my constant question goes back to kind of the three whys, in the sense of, why are we doing this? And if we don't, if we're dissecting a problem, right, and say we had something go on, and we're like, well, okay, well, we want to change this. Well, why do we want to change this? Well, we want to change it for this client or this workflow. Well, why? Like, why are we doing it? And that's just a discussion around like getting to that root cause of the why. So when we're talking about priorities, and I'm thinking big picture priorities, right? Not which email am I going to respond to next, or who am I going to call next, but a strategic initiative that we're going to invest in, whether it's time and money or what have you, is I'm sitting there going, okay, but why? Right? And if we can't get to a point where we understand the why so clear that I could explain it to my teenager, because I think that it should be that simple, that direct, then we're off at some point, right? And so it's probably not the number one priority. So Dan, our founder, and I were going through it recently, and it's like 6 initiatives that we've been kind of mulling over and trying to understand them, but we're not going to kind of kick them off in earnest until we understand the why behind it. We have a plan, and we've kept a lot of those back because the why is not clear enough yet. And so I think, that helps with the communication, because then when somebody has those tough questions of, well, why are we changing it this way? And why do you want to do it this way? If you haven't gone through that process, then your answers are kind of hollow, and you erode that trust, right? Because if they're like, wait, hold on, that doesn't make any sense because of this, and you can't kind of at least defend it in some way. I think that oftentimes we get mixed between here's what we're doing and here's how we're approaching this and why, and okay, but let's change it. No, like hold on, like let's get through the explanation and the why first rather than jump straight into discussions, because oftentimes it should be answered by the explanation, which, look, if you look through the lens of, if I'm answering or asking myself, why did we spend the last 6 months doing this? And I don't have that clear picture, you're kind of scratching your head going, there's got to be something more important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, I mean, it can provide a lot of learning too. Although, how much, it's kind of like what we were saying earlier. It's like, at what point do you make that decision to say,
Right.
We're stopping this, we're going to make a shift, we're going to pivot? How much longer do you go on for it before it becomes not just a disruption, but an actual, what's the word I want to find?
Distraction.
That too, right? Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we start to wrap up, so another question for the audience in terms of priorities. If you had to name your top 3 leadership priorities right now, are they based on urgency or importance? Because that's something I see show up in coaching sessions a lot too. So Hunter, I really appreciate the practicality of all of this. And you've given us a real look at, curiosity, resilience, and prioritization, because these are muscles that leaders have to build in business, especially when working through challenges. But I also want to ask you, when you look back at the toughest times in your leadership journey, what did they teach you about yourself?
Ooh. You save the good questions for last. I see how that works.
Of course.
Well done. So I took on the COO role in January of 2020. We were having the best quarter of the company's history, and then the world came crashing down. And I had to learn elements real quick and in a hurry that I wasn't familiar with necessarily. The world wasn't familiar with the situation. And so staying open and kind of, okay, what are we going to do? But getting feedback from colleagues that I was quick to make decisions. I was short. I was getting, on that wit's end. So sometimes having that small group of colleagues, right? Not everybody can be this, but having that small group that can kind of call you out and be like, hey, you're off today. What's going on? I think having that around you and having that trust circle helps me be more curious, because I realized I could kind of go further out on the edge because I had a team that was around me that I trusted to say, hold on, pull back. And so, as you're looking through any kind of resilience, to me, it's somewhat self-reflection of saying, okay, what can I do better next time? Because I'm always looking for that next level, that next edge, that next, something. Is knowing who you have around you that you can be supported by is as important as to the own decision and information you've got.
100%. Yeah. People that are going to lift you up as well as challenge you or call you out and say, hey, wait a second. Yeah. Hugely impactful. Absolutely. Well, thanks for your insight. How can people find you and learn more about you? And also, you mentioned something before we went live about a new book that you now have out. So share about that really quick.
I did. So earlier this year, I gave a TED Talk out in Bath, UK, called Caffeinated with Curiosity, which was really kind of a culmination of some of the thoughts that I had going on. But then in the course of that, I also wrote a book called The 5-Year-Old CEO, The Power of Childlike Curiosity and Leadership. And we talked through some of the elements, but there's more there. But the idea here is that, we need to make sure that we keep that as part of leadership, truly asking the questions. In a world that we have instant access to information and quote unquote answers, we don't necessarily always have the wisdom or the knowledge to be able to leverage that into the best decisions as leadership. So making sure that stays at the forefront. LinkedIn's probably always the best. Hunter McMahon on LinkedIn, or you can find me on our website at idsinc.com.
Nice. Perfect. Well, I appreciate you being here. And this is a topic that I could talk about a lot. And your book sounds amazing. So Anyway, for those that have listened to this episode, I do have a gift for you, because in most of my sessions, two things that come up. One is difficult decisions and hard conversations. And I've created the Conversation Prep Toolkit. It's a complimentary guide. And if you sign up for my newsletter, it will be sent to you. So Jesse, I'm hoping you have that link. And if you don't, we'll get it to you so we can put it in the chat. Let's see. So also stay connected. You know, if this conversation resonated with you, you of course can subscribe to my newsletter and learn about upcoming episodes and also insights for leaders and founders. Also follow and like my business page so that you don't miss future lives. And also share this episode with someone who's ready to turn their, look into this topic around resilience and curiosity. If they want to turn the knob up on that for themselves too, this could be a good one. But Hunter, before we say goodbye, is there anything else that you want to bring up that we didn't cover or talk about today?
No, I really appreciate the time and the opportunity. You know, as the quote came from Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental.
Nice. I love it. All right, everybody. I'm Alanna Levenson, and this is Alchemize with Alanna. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.